Welcome to another edition of The Great American Story. And boy, do we have a great one for you today. I'm Ron Hoon. John Noetzel, the creator of The Great American Story, joins us. We both, I think, have a real affinity for this mountain and the man behind the mountain.
This is one of my favorite places to visit.
Yes.
I've been there several times. I was there on the July 4th.
Yeah.
And it's a special place.
We're talking about Mount Rushmore.
We are. I think the shot behind us says it all.
Yeah, kind of gave it all away.
Yeah.
I'd gone as a kid, and it just, it is so, there's nothing else like it in the entire nation.
Yeah.
And it just stays with you. And then I returned just in this last year, a man in my 60s, and I got that same feeling I did when I was a kid.
Yeah.
About how it gives you this patriotic feeling, but it also gives you such a appreciation for the job that the carvers did on this project and for the genius of Gutzon Borglum.
No question. There's such a sense of wonder when you take that walk around the presidential trail and you get to the base of that.
Right.
And you look at the detail of this monument, and I just can't figure out how they did it. You know,
right.
I know they used explosives but to sculpt those faces so perfectly and smoothly and to scale, especially in the 30s when this went on.
Yeah.
During the Depression, I might add.
When you're hanging by a cable
Yeah.
over the side of a mountain.
Yeah. About 5,000 feet up in the air above sea level.
And by the way, no one died during the entire project.
That's right. That's right.
And I don't think about anything that they were doing back in those days would have passed OSHA.
No way. You talk over 400 people working on this, and most of them were miners that had come
Local
up.
miners who had, been working in a mine, but certainly had been dangling from the top of the mountain, trying to shove those dynamite charges into the side of a mountain and not get,
It is really something. And so to go back and kind of retrace the steps of that.
Yeah.
Borglum had this vision for a monument with faces of presidents. He wanted presidents. The original idea was to have Western characters.
Yes, right.
Help me out. Doane Robinson.
Doane Robinson, local business. Let's go back further, John. Okay, so his dad, by the way, he has this name, Gutzon Borglum.
Yeah.
You're like, where does that name come from? His father, Danish immigrant, part of the Great Mormon Migration from Europe into the American West back in the 1800s. And so little Gutzon is born into this family in a little town in Idaho, and somehow fortune smiles on him enough that his family decides they are going to send him to Europe.
Oh, wow.
To study under Pierre Rodin, maybe the greatest sculptor France has ever seen.
Sure.
And he comes back to the United States charged up. I mean, he's barely, probably early 20s at that point. I mean, he still had this teenage dream that he would be the greatest sculptor America had ever seen. And I think he probably qualifies
I think you're right. Yes. So he was actually working on another project when this one came up. He was in Stone Mountain, Georgia.
Now that story is fascinating too. So I've not been to Stone Mountain.
Nor have I.
Have you?
No.
But the idea was to carve into the side of a huge mountain the faces, I guess, and the images of some of the Confederate leaders. Mostly Robert E. Lee, but some of the other names as well. But almost from day one, he did not get along with the people who were behind that project to the extent that eventually he got fired from that job. He was irascible, I think is a good word to use. He was argumentative, but he was always convinced he was right. Matter of fact, he had a quote, John. Let me see if I can find it here. He once said that God only makes a Michelangelo or a Gutzon Borglum about once every 1,000 years. So he was good.
So he was humble, you're saying, basically.
Super humble guy.
Yeah.
Super humble. But he gets, about the time he's getting fired from the Stone Mountain carving job, this Doane Robinson that you mentioned, a local businessman up in that Rapid City area, is reading the news reports and says to himself, I think what's going on there, I think we got some mountains that would
Yeah,
be
we
good to
do.
carve around here.
The Black Hills, granite mountains.
Yes,
Why not? Yes.
right?
Yeah. So, like I said, his vision was Western characters, like
Yes.
Lewis
Lewis and Clark.
and Clark.
Yep.
I think Buffalo Bill might have been
Yes.
one of those.
Red Cloud, great Native American leader. Yep.
But Borglum had a different vision.
Yeah.
And they originally wanted to put it in the Needles in the Black Hills, which
Yes,
is another area
right.
of spires. It wasn't suitable for what
Right.
Borglum's vision was.
Yeah.
So
There's a drawing, by the way, somewhere in that museum when you go there that shows the original. The Needles would have been cool.
Yeah.
Because the idea was to be almost like a full body of,
Yeah.
I think, Washington and Lincoln. Maybe?
well, the original design was waist up
Okay.
for
Yeah.
the sculpt.
One
for
per
the-
needle.
Yeah, right.
Sort of,
yeah.
right?
Have you been to the Needles?
No.
Oh, the Needles
Yeah.
Highway is one of the coolest things, and I'm going to put a video up here so you can see what it's like to drive the Needles Highway. It's really
Yeah.
cool.
You
Yeah.
know, so there's this picture that I took when I was there last year, John, and I just wanted to say, we're in Arizona. We operate out of Phoenix. I love going to the Grand Canyon to be with someone when they first lay their eyes on the Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
Mount Rushmore is one of the very few places in America that has that exact same impact
I
on you.
totally agree with you.
When you first see it, you just
100%.
can't believe that it actually got done,
Yeah.
that it actually got accomplished.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this happened in the 30s. The original idea that Robinson had was
Yes.
in the late 20s, but construction actually began in 27 and went through the 30s and ended up. It was completed in 1941, but along the way there were some really interesting things. We can get into why he chose the 4 presidents that he did, but things like Jefferson's head originally was to the left of Washington.
Yes.
And it didn't work out. It was in an unstable area, so Borglum blew it up.
Yes.
Put him on the right of
That
Washington.
was 18 months worth of work.
Yeah. Down the drain.
And it actually, if you think about the way the almost the 3D version of the mountain would have been back then, to have Jefferson it would have been on Washington's right side.
Correct.
But a little further back. And then even more prominent Washington. And then Lincoln over here
look
as
completely
well. And then, of
different,
course,
right?
Roosevelt worked in as well. He actually was pretty good friends with Teddy Roosevelt.
He was.
I don't believe he was
was.
friends with Washington or
Probably
some of the
Howard Lincoln.
early
Hey,
Thomas Jefferson.
our friends at Movie Tone have some great videos that we were able to secure of construction. So let's take a look at those. There's a couple of videos here that are really, really neat, and I think we'll show some really cool pictures.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
High up on Mount Rushmore in South Dakota's Black Hills, the mammoth head of George Washington takes shape. Gutzon Borglum, the famous sculptor, directs the work.
You, Anderson, go down around the nose there and check up all the points on the under part of the nose and be very careful about the left nostril.
Geologists say this spectacular masterpiece will defy the erosions of time for ages. In the meantime, the work of construction goes on.
Mount Rushmore, and approaching completion, Washington, Jefferson, and Lincoln. Washington's eyes are 8 feet across, his nose 20 feet long, longer than the entire face of the Egyptian Sphinx. There are Mount Rushmore, sculptor Gutzon Borglum, and his son. If Washington on that scale were to sit under Niagara, his head and neck would be above the falls. Here the sculptor does his carving with dynamite. A year more to complete this stupendous monument to democracy.
Those are great videos.
Yeah, they really are.
They're awesome.
Great videos, and it's interesting.
I should say film. It's
Okay, film.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those were back in the days
The
when you went
30s.
to the movie theater,
Yep.
and I bet you if you wanted to get caught up on the news, you made sure you got there early before
Indeed.
the movie ever started.
Indeed.
But it is interesting that originally he had an estimate that this job could be done for about $400,000. I'm looking $460,000 to build the project. It was about double that.
It was.
It was, in the end, they built it for just under $1 million.
It was close to $1 million. That's right. Back in the 1941. But he had to work to secure funding. There was the political end to this.
Constantly.
And Coolidge originally approved this project and
Right.
basically did the ceremonial first dig.
And thank goodness that Borglum was such a salesman, because he was the one that convinced President Calvin Coolidge to come spend one of his summer vacations out there in the Black Hills of South Dakota. And Coolidge got so excited about the idea that he said, I'm on board. Now, it's interesting, though, because you had these backers in South Dakota, you had the government starting to get involved, but the story that was told about the bizarre reaction that the man who thought of himself as the greatest sculptor in America, when he was fired at Stone Mountain, he literally took an axe and chopped up all of the scale models that he had created for that project. And in doing so, he ended up being sued by the backers of that project. They swore out a warrant.
Oh my goodness.
To get him arrested, and he fled the state of Georgia before that could ever happen. How about that?
That is something.
So you knew when you were in South Dakota, you knew, okay, the guy's a little high strung, but let's not get on his bad side.
Right? Well, and on that, let's go to our trivia question, because it's directly related to Borglum.
Okay.
Beyond the 4 presidential faces, Gutzon Borglum originally intended to sculpt an additional element onto Mount Rushmore that was never completed. What was it? We have a large American flag draped below the faces, an inscription of the Gettysburg Address, or a Hall of Records vault within the mountain.
Okay. Well, we will invite you to guess there at home.
Do you know it?
I do know it.
Yeah. I actually didn't know it right away. I had to do a little research. And I've been to Rushmore a number of times.
Yeah.
I must not have been paying attention.
We'll give you the answer coming up after the break, but boy, there's a whole backstory to why that didn't happen as well.
There sure is.
So we'll take a break and continue right after this on The Great American Story. Welcome back, everybody, to The Great American Story. And our question was, beyond the 4 presidents' faces, Gutzon Borglum originally intended to sculpt an additional element onto Mount Rushmore. So, Johnny, you know the answer.
I do know the answer. Yeah. I came up with the questions.
Yeah, it's a good point.
But, yeah.
But in doing our research, the beauty of how much we enjoy doing The Great American Stories. We each do our own research and come to the table as just a couple of guys who love history.
Yeah.
We hope you do too, and that's why you're watching. But yeah, there was quite a bit of talk about the Hall of Records vault within the mountain, and it is very interesting to me. I mean, we'll get on toward the end of Borglum's life.
Yeah.
But when he died, his son had to take over the project. It was actually close to completion.
It was. Yep. He died the same year it was completed.
But I think that idea on that very day, once he was gone, he could have probably pushed it through with his type of determination, that Hall of Records. But he wanted the original Declaration of Independence up there on that mountain behind those heads.
Right. So there's a secret hall that he started sculpting.
Correct.
Behind the heads.
Right.
That you can see in some pictures. It's not open to the public.
Right.
But
imagine you would have had to hike all the way up that mountain to see the Declaration of Independence.
Right. I know. Safely stored behind Abraham Lincoln's granite head, right?
Yes, right.
But
sure.
Congress found out that he was he was doing the side job, basically, because the money that was allocated for the project was for the sculpting of the heads alone. So he was basically forced to shut it down. Like, no, you're not going to drill a hole in the side of the mountain for this. We're paying money for you to build this amazing sculpture, the faces. So he got shut down. So that was never realized. Kind of a neat idea, I guess.
Yes, it would have been, right?
And so
have those park rangers. Now, it's interesting because they really needed the government assistance.
They did.
There was not a lot of money floating around in South Dakota, and don't forget, a lot of this was happening during the Great Depression.
I know, and that amazes me that something like that could have been built during the Great Depression.
Yes,
right.
right.
I mean, where money is at a premium,
correct,
and labor is what it is, and I guess they probably had no shortage of labor at that point.
Right.
Anybody would have wanted to work.
Well, the bravery of these miners.
Yeah.
So it was a two-step process. First, you had to get up there and dynamite, just blow up as much of that mountain as he had calculated.
Yeah.
You would have to. But then you had, and again, these were miners that were used to working in mines, not hanging on the side of a mountain.
Right.
But then you had the carvers who would come in and do the softer work, the more specific work with a jackhammer or sometimes even just a chisel.
Right.
To gradually get just the overall sculpting the way it is.
And it's so neat when you're there because you can see all of the little rock at the base of the mountain that I'm sure was part of those the dynamite explosions that just kind of crumbled down towards the base of the mountain.
I
right?
heard a good story in that the idea originally was that they were going to clear all that away.
Oh, really?
But some of the more, let's just say guys who were willing to work for an extra buck or two who were up there working on the mountain, they would collect up some of the rocks of granite.
Wow.
And sell them for $2. You could have an original piece of Mount Rushmore and sell them for $1 or $2, that kind of a thing. And originally the plan was to excavate and remove it all. But again, once he died, his son came in, Lincoln.
Yep.
And Lincoln Borglum, and he did his best at running the project. But that was the year 1941. And the United States government suddenly had all kinds of different priorities, and that was really going to wrap up.
That's right. World War II was on the horizon.
Rushmore.
No
Correct.
question. No question.
Yeah.
Well, a couple of things. 60-foot tall sculptures. Okay. Noses are 20 feet long. Mouths are 18 feet wide.
Okay.
Eyes are 11 feet wide.
Yeah.
And you're standing at about 5,725 feet above sea level.
Oh,
up
that's
there.
interesting.
But we were talking during the break about why he picked the presidents that he did.
Yeah.
So we have Washington, Jefferson, Roosevelt, and Lincoln. Washington represents our nation as its founding father. So that was kind of the centerpiece, right? And he has prominence in the sculpture.
Sure.
Jefferson represents expansion. South Dakota was actually part of the Louisiana Purchase. So that their territory was added as part of Jefferson's Louisiana Purchase, so appropriately he was put on there as well. Roosevelt represents conservation and the industrial blossoming of the nation. As you said earlier, he was friends with Roosevelt, so that's kind of neat that he's up there and well. And Lincoln represents perseverance, and we all know what Lincoln persevered through the Civil War and had a pretty wild presidency. And each, we should say, the Mount Rushmore was completed in stages. So Washington was finished in 1930. Jefferson was finished in 1936. Roosevelt was finished in 1939, and Lincoln was finished in 1937. So Roosevelt was actually...
By the way, each head got its own celebration.
It did, and it's funny you say that, because we have video of Jefferson's celebration with Roosevelt, and we're going to take a look at that right now.
The president at a stupendous shrine dedicated to great presidents. A mountain carved as a patriotic monument, Mount Rushmore, South Dakota. Beside the mighty face of Washington is that of Jefferson. Covered by the flag, it's to be unveiled and is dedicated by President Roosevelt on his tour of the Dust Bowl. sculpture by the power of dynamite. Two final blasts, and then comes the unveiling. Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the Declaration of Independence, a great president. Washington there was dedicated by President Coolidge. President Roosevelt dedicates Jefferson. Lincoln and Theodore Roosevelt will be included to be dedicated by future presidents. The sculptor Gutzon Borglum tells President Roosevelt about the monumental magnitude of the work, sculpture that will endure for untold thousands of years.
Okay, so I have my Mount Rushmore.
Your National Park
My
Service
National
map.
Park Service map. And there's a
Good.
great quote in here by Roosevelt.
All right.
This can be a monument and an inspiration for the continuance of the democratic Republican form of government, not only in our own beloved country, but, we hope, throughout the world. You said that in 1936. It's a good one.
That is a good one.
Yeah.
Since we're bringing out our kind of our little favorite things from the gift shop,
love this one.
For example, there's just so much.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I ended up doing? This is one of those 3D
To the angled. Yeah, you
look
can
at
see
that,
it. You can
right?
see it. Yep.
Okay.
Love it.
Yeah. So I bought a bunch of these for my grandkids.
I love
hoping
it.
to take them to Mount Rushmore someday. I guarantee you, if you go, I can't guarantee that you'll see mountain goats or squirrels. Well, I probably guarantee.
I saw a
squirrels.
mountain goat on the top of Crazy Horse.
Oh wow!
Which Crazy Horse is another sculpture.
Yes.
In Rapid City or in the Black Hills.
We should just mention, if you're thinking to yourself, should I ever go there on vacation? Not only is it beautiful territory, there are so many touristy things to do there.
Yes.
You'll keep the kids entertained for a whole week.
Yeah, we're
just in
giving the
Black Hills.
Rapid City Chamber of Commerce a golden plug here, right? But hey, next July 4th is the 250th anniversary of the U.S. of A., and they are going to have fireworks at Mount Rushmore.
Can you
There was an
imagine?
article that came out this week. Oh, yeah. I was there on July 4th, but no fireworks. But I'm going to try to make it there.
Oh,
I'll be
John,
honest with you.
It'd be so great.
Hey,
Now-
we were talking about the granite and the rocks and all
Yes,
that.
right.
I came across a number here.
Okay.
450,000 tons of rock. Dynamite carved 90% of that mountain, and that's how much rock came out of there.
Gosh.
450,000 tons.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just the gargantuan nature of the project.
Yeah.
Nothing like that had ever been done, and frankly, it hasn't been done since.
Yeah.
One thing I never thought about, we just take for granted that, of course, it's called Mount Rushmore, but the story of Mr. Rushmore is totally fascinating.
It is.
Here's a guy who was a lawyer from New York who specialized in mining operations and had come out to South Dakota on that first trip and looked at that mountain, which, by the way, the natives' name for it was Six Grandfathers.
Right. And we should say there is some controversy surrounding the land that it's on. It's sacred land
Sure.
to the
Yes.
local
Right.
tribe, the Lakota.
Yeah.
So there is that, you know.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah.
Good. Yeah, for sure. I would have loved to have been there when Gutzon Borglum, and at the time he brought his son, young Lincoln, who was just I think maybe 12 or 13 at the time, and they're riding around on horseback trying to decide which mountain. The first one they pitched to him, he said nope. Second one they pitched to him, nope. But it was when they got to this mountain, the Six Grandfathers, that he said, that's one that I can work on. But
That's it.
Anyway, so Rushmore, Mr. Rushmore was a guy named Charles Rushmore. And when he was out there on that first trip, he's like, what is that mountain? Does that mountain have a name? And they said, no. But you know what? We could call it Mount Rushmore.
There you go.
It was kind of a half joke, but the name stuck.
It stuck.
And he donated
did.
a huge amount of money at the time.
I think it was
to help the project.
$5,000.
Correct.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which would probably be worth, I don't know, $150,000 today, something along those lines.
Yeah.
So, yeah, unfortunately, he passed in 1931, so we never got to see its completion.
Yeah. And we should say it was completed in October of 1941. They declared it over. Like you said, we had other business to attend to as a country.
Closing thought, John?
Oh, I can't. It's just one of those places that everybody should see.
Yeah.
Every American should see,
Yes.
because it does pull at the patriotic heartstrings when you're sitting there and you're looking at this. And the wonder of how they did this, especially in the 30s and early 1940s. Just a real special place.
I once heard him say that he had given an extra 3 inches to all the various presidential features on the faces, so that over time the natural wear and tear on the mountain from Mother Nature could be allowed for. And he said the extra 3 inches on the nose and the eyes and the mouth and the ears and everything else will gradually give way, but not for 300,000 years. And he wanted to think of this as a project that wouldn't truly be done for another 300,000 years.
That's something.
Yeah.
That's a good way to close.
Mount Rushmore.
Yeah.
It's all part of the great American story.